Welcome back. All right, career video for all you fine people on the internet, and it's a Hall of Famer, and it's a forward. We're doing goalie videos, figured, we'll do a forward video. So Yvan Cournoyer, who was a player in the 60s through the 70s for a Montreal Canadiens team that was kind of stacked. French-Canadian players, you start in Montreal, and most of the really good hockey players during that era, French-Canadian. So they had the advantage, but no problem with them using it. Cournoyer was known as the Roadrunner. He was small of stature, 5'7", and fast. You have to be, because if you're small in stature like that and you're not a good skater, you're a little slower, you're not going to make the National Hockey League. I would think it would have been the same even back then. 63-64, he makes his debut with the Montreal Canadiens, just 5 games, but a head-turning 4 goals in those 5 games. So 4 points in 5 games. 64-65, plays 55 games for the Habs, 7 goals, 10 assists, 17 points. Montreal brought their players along slowly. During this era, there are plenty of them that start off with, stats that aren't necessarily head turning, but eventually they get there. In the playoffs, 12 games played, 3 goals, 1 assist, 4 points, and a Stanley Cup for Yvan Cournoyer. 65-66, plays 65 games for the Montreal Canadiens, 18 goals, 11 assists, 29 points. In the playoffs, he adds 2 goals and 3 assists for 5 points in 10 games, and another Stanley Cup. One thing for Cournoyer, his hands would have been heavy with Stanley Cup rings by the time he was done. 66-67, 69 games played, 25 goals, which is 7th in the NHL that year, 15 assists, 40 points. In the playoffs, again, he has 2 goals, 3 assists for 5 points in 10 games. He played in an All-Star game that year, but he did not win the Stanley Cup. So no Stanley Cup for Montreal that year. 67-68, plays 64 games, 28 goals, 32 assists, 60 points. So you can see he's gradually growing in his offensive totals. In the playoffs, 13 games, 6 goals, 8 assists, 14 points. A Stanley Cup and being above a point per game in the playoffs, that's another head-turning moment for him. 68-69, he plays 76 games that year, 43 goals, which is 6th overall, 44 assists and 87 points, which is also 6th overall in the NHL. In the playoffs, 14 games, 4 goals, 7 assists, 11 points. He's a second-team All-Star, wins the Stanley Cup, and he's 9th in Hart voting. So getting a lot of attention. 69-70, a bit of a down year for him. 72 games, 27 goals, 36 assists, and 63 points. No accolades to speak of. But 70-71 builds him right back up. 65 games played, 37 goals, which is 8th overall in the NHL, 36 assists, 37 goals, which is 8th overall, 36 assists, 73 points. I knew those 36s were going to throw me off. I knew that. In the playoffs, 20 games as the playoffs expand with the NHL's expansion. 10 goals, 12 assists, 22 points. He's an All-Star. He's a second-team All-Star as well. So he plays in the All-Star game. He's named to the All-Star teams at the end of the season, too, and wins the Stanley Cup. So one thing to keep in mind for Cournoyer here is that as we get into the 70s, scoring's going up. And if we'd had the kind of scoring in the mid-60s like we do in the late 70s, I think Cournoyer's totals would have been a lot higher. Just going out on a limb there. So 72-73 is the season after the one we're going to talk about, which is 71-72. 73 games played, 47 goals, which is 4th overall, and that's the closest to 50 he ever got. 36 assists, 83 points, which is 8th overall. 6 games in the playoffs, 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points. He's in the All-Star game again. He's a second-team All-Star again, and he's 5th in Lady Byng voting. So gentlemanly player, gets recognized there. Now we get into 72-73, plays 67 games, 40 goals, which is 9th overall, 39 assists for 79 points. So 12 more points than games played. Again, if we had brought in Cournoyer during the 80s, he probably would have had a ton of points. 17 games played in those playoffs, 15 goals, 10 assists, 25 points. And it's quite the year. All-Star game, yep, Conn Smythe winner, absolutely. And this may very well be what cinches his Hall of Fame credentials. Second-team All-Star with the Stanley Cup, and he's 9th in Hart voting again. 73-74 season, 67 games, 40 goals, which is 7th overall in the NHL, 33 assists, 73 points. In the playoffs, 6 games, 5 goals, 2 assists, 7 points. He plays in the All-Star game, and he's 9th in the Hart voting. So there's that consistency in his game. 74-75, 76 games played, 29 goals, 45 assists, 74 points. So the goals drop off, but the assists come up, so his point totals stay very similar. 11 games in the playoffs, 5 goals, 6 assists, 11 points. And of course, 74 and 75, those are the years that Philadelphia wins the Stanley Cup, breaking up what could have been a ridiculously long run for Montreal as champs. They could have won it in 74 or 75. So 75, 76, 71 games played, 32 goals, 36 assists for 68 points in the playoffs, 13 games, 3 goals, 6 assists, 9 points, and it's another Stanley Cup. 76-77. So we'll come over to this side of the board for a moment here. He only plays 60 games. He does not appear in the playoffs because he's struggling with back issues. His back caused him to really struggle to get out on the ice. He played through injury a lot, but it's one of those, are you hurt or are you injured? And he considered himself to be hurt, and so he'd keep playing. But it would force him to retire eventually. So he plays 60 games in 76-77, 25 goals, 28 assists, 53 points. Does get his name on the Stanley Cup. Even though he did not play in the playoffs that year. 77-78, 68 games played, 24 goals, 29 assists, 53 points. In the playoffs, 15 games, 7 goals, 4 assists, 11 points. All-Star game, yes. Stanley Cup, also yes. 78-79, and again, the back problems are really adding up. He only plays 15 games due to those problems that year. 2 goals, 5 assists, 7 points, and he's not able to return for the playoffs. But Montreal wins the Stanley Cup for the 4th year in a row, and he does get his name on the Stanley Cup. So he ends up with 10 Stanley Cups in his career, plays 968 regular season games, records 428 goals, which is 85th on the all-time list, 435 assists, 863 points. In the playoffs, 147 games played, 64 goals, 63 assists, 127 points. Keeping in mind, there's 2 playoffs here where he wasn't able to play due to injury, so he could have ended up with a lot more games played in the playoffs and more points, but there you go. In 2017, when the NHL named their 100 greatest players in history, Yvan Cournoyer's name was on that list. The Hall of Fame called him in 1982, so as soon as he was eligible, he was in the Hall of Fame. He did play for Team Canada in the 1972 Summit Series. In the 8th and deciding game, he got the goal that tied the game that allowed Canada to win the game. If not for Cournoyer's goal, we might be talking about the great failure of the 72 Summit Series. His 10 Stanley Cups leaves him tied with Jean Beliveau, behind Henri Richard by 1. Richard had 11 Stanley Cups in his career. Just insane how many Stanley Cups that era of the Montreal Canadiens piled on. And it started with the Maurice Richard Montreal Canadiens prior to that, and he came in, of course, before his brother Henri did. Just amazing run by the Montreal Canadiens, and Yvan Cournoyer was a big part of that. It is interesting that he never won like a major trophy in his career, and he's in the 100 greatest players list. But I don't really have a problem with that because, honestly, 10 Stanley Cup rings, a Conn Smythe trophy, and just being consistently excellent at what he did, his speed, his ability to play the game for as long as he did, even with injury, I totally understand why he gets the accolades he does. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. And I'm wearing Montreal again. I've been wearing Montreal a lot this summer. Thank you guys for all your support, though. I will talk to you again soon.